All right, talk a little football, a little earlier than normal, but Johnny Mac kind enough to switch flip-flop with Mark Jackson. We'll talk Sixers and Celtics with him in about an hour. Right now, let's get into the NFL news and notes of the day. John McMullen, 97.3ESPN.com, at JF McMullen on Twitter. John, it's very windy and it's mildly chilly out here. How are you?
Doing well. I've been there with the wind. I understand that.
Well, it is a little windy out here on the golf course, but we're having a good time with the Atlantic City Rescue Mission. But let's get into some NFL news and notes here. And yesterday, it seems like every time we have a conversation, slightly right after some things happen and change, right after we have our talk. And when that happened yesterday, we saw that the Eagles picked up that option on Doug Pederson, which I guess, after winning the Super Bowl, that's probably a no-brainer move.
Yeah, if they had a 10-year option on him, they would have picked that up. It was actually picked up far earlier. The news just came out. They picked it up right after the Super Bowl. So that was one of those that was obviously going to happen. And Doug's going to be here for a long time, past 5 years. Anyway, he's got a lot of goodwill built up in the bank now, so he's got quite a long leash, probably the longest leash in the NFL right now. I wanted to ask you about is he the kind of, do you envision Doug Pederson now as the kind of guy that will be the 10, 12, 15-year coach of the Philadelphia Eagles? Oh yeah, like I said, he's here for as long as he wants to be here, and he's still a very young guy. I don't see the success all of a sudden taking a dramatic dip and going in the other direction. I'm not going to say they're going to win the Super Bowl again or win 3 in 5 years, but they are set up for a nice little run here as long as Carson Wentz can get back and completely healthy. They're going to be a contender. And if you're in the dance, you got a chance. So I think he's going to be around here for a very, very long time. Now,
what's the shelf life? What's the shelf life on the Super Bowl? Is that 3 seasons? Let's say next year, just theoretically, they go 7-9, don't make the playoffs. The next year, maybe they're, what's the shelf life of that wearing off?
Well, I think it's less than it ever has been before in today's sort of environment. And certainly in a city like Philadelphia, I think it could turn in a negative direction if you see underachieving consistently. In the past, I would say it buys you 10 years. I don't think it does that any longer. I would say in this instance, because you're talking about a team that never won one, that hadn't won a championship since 1960, I got to give it at least 5 years because I find it hard to believe people will be pushing this guy out the door. They already made one mistake. They didn't want him to begin with. Now that he's got them finally what they want.
Else.
Yeah, I mean, you got to give him some credit. You got to give him some. And I would say 5 years at least.
John McMullen's with us, and by the way, we're talking about Doug Pederson. He had his option year extended, so he's here for at least, 3 more years, right? The 5th-year option, so he's here for 3 more, minimally.
Yeah, he originally signed a 4-year deal with a team option. And that kind of tells you, by the way, how much question there was. Usually you get 5 years to start, and people can turn on that. You see how quickly Ben McAdoo went from genius to out of a job up the turnpike. So I think people their patience is probably less than it ever has been in the past, just because of a sort of a short attention span environment. But that original contract kind of shows you that nobody thought this guy was going to be successful.
and we can go back, and everyone does. Poor Mike Lombardi's quote, they always pick that out, and he'll never live that down. There's not a lot of people that believed in Doug Pederson.
No, there wasn't. And quite frankly, John, I think there was a lot of Eagles fans in year one that were not believing in Doug Pederson. There were certain weeks where you were scratching your head saying, much like Gabe Kapler, like, is this guy qualified to be the head coach of a football team? I want to kind of ask you, because you're around him all the time, you cover the team, and you've seen kind of the day-to-day of Doug Pederson. When or what was it, or when do you think he kind of changed or got it?
Well, I think he had it from early on. I was, and I took a lot of heat during his rookie season because I defended him for the most part. I thought he had an opportunity. Didn't think he was going to be a Super Bowl coach in year two. I'm not trying to say that, but I saw some positive things early on. It started with Sam Bradford. You remember, Sam was very unhappy when the Eagles drafted Carson Wentz, and he left OTAs. And I thought that was an opportunity to have this big fracture in the locker room, and he handled it tremendously. And when I look at head coaches in this league, the most important thing to me is not X's and O's, it's leadership. And he showed that he was a leader fairly early on. So I thought there was a pretty good opportunity he was going to be a good coach. I didn't think he was going to win the Super Bowl, as I said, this early in his career. But he showed a lot of positive things that people kind of ignored in his rookie season.
Yeah. And, you know, when you look at reasons why the Eagles won the Super Bowl, where do you rank Doug Pederson on that list?
Very highly. I mean, this is a talent-driven league, first, right. And Doug says that. I think that's, you know, one of the positives of him, and the biggest difference between him and Chip Kelly. He knows you need talent to win in this league, and I thought Chip thought he was more important, and his scheme was more important in the way that he did things than talent, and it's just not. And Doug is a longtime player in this league. I think realizes that. He realized it and continues to realize it. But so while I say that, talent, you have to have talent to win, but he was a big part of it. I mean, his aggressiveness, he's changing, and it's ironic again because when Chip came here, he was billed as this innovator who was going to change professional football. And Doug was billed as this retread of Andy Reid. And it turns out Doug is the one who I think is going to change professional football. Because I think the copycat aspect of this team is going to be to copy the aggressiveness that they showed on fourth downs.
All right, Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. We're live at the Linwood Country Club. You know, you mentioned I was at the NovaCare Center complex the day that Jeffrey Lurie said we want to be 5 years ahead of 5 years. You know, and that's when they fired Andy Reid that day. They didn't hire Chip Kelly yet, but he said, you know, we want to find that next guy. And then they kind of went back to the comfort level, right? I mean, that's what everybody kind of thought here. But when they hired Pederson, and that's why, like, when they, you know, this whole thing of them extending him made me think of all these questions about Pederson. I thought it was really this interesting thing of we go back to the day he was hired and ask the question, what stood out about Pederson that made the Eagles, what did they see in him? And many people, John, thought it was Andy Reid's recommendation above everything else, right?
Yeah, at the end, I mean, if you want to be honest about it, he was not the Eagles' choice. The Eagles' choice was Adam Gase. He decided to go to Miami. Their second choice was Ben McAdoo, who decided to stay with the Giants. And they were down to their third choice, and they got the recommendation from Andy, who they have a ton of respect for, and they went in that direction. Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good, because he's obviously a better coach than those two guys, and they didn't want him. They wanted those two guys. And that would have been, I think, a colossal mistake. And I've also been very appreciative of what Howie Roseman has done since he has retaken over this organization, the football side of this organization. But I got to tell you, as far as hiring head coaches, look, they got it wrong with Chip, and they were going to get it wrong if they got the guy they originally wanted. So you can play revisionist history and say this was the plan, but it really wasn't the plan.
Yeah.
John, you were talking about Doug Pederson having his contract extended, some other details coming out about Tim Jernigan, and you write on our website on 973ESPN.com, 2 words right at the top, mystery solved as to why he reworked his deal. Why did he rework that deal?
Yeah, I kind of talked about this a little bit with Mike, and I couldn't figure out for the life of me why somebody would willingly give up $11 million, and the answer is they wouldn't.
So, there you go. Take my money.
Yeah, there is a provision in the current CBA that if you get injured outside of football, so outside the Novaterra complex, outside of what the Eagles' business is, that they could have cut Tim Jernigan with no cap ramifications. So essentially, it came down. They offered him $3 million. They said, "We'll pay you $3 million. If not, we're going to release you." So he made really the only decision he could make, and that's to give up that $11 million guaranteed salary in 2019. So basically, he gets $3 million this year, and there's no guaranteed money moving forward. And obviously, his health is going to be a big question mark as we get closer to the season.
And you wrote about how the Eagles had all the leverage with Tim Jernigan. Is that the same case with Darren Sproles as well?
Yeah, it is. I mean, 35-year-old running backs coming off a torn ACL aren't going to get a lot of money. That's just the reality of the NFL. And Darren wanted to play. He didn't want to go out the way he went out last year, week 3, torn the ACL, breaking his arm. So I think it would have been different if he lasted the entire season. He probably would have retired. But he wants to go out on his own terms. And $1.4 million is essentially what the Eagles used to sign him, and that's a pretty good value. Darren's going to be 35 in June, so next month. But he keeps himself in tremendous shape. You've seen some of the videos of him coming back in his rehab. I don't think there's any question he can still be helpful to them. And the Eagles are going to get a bargain. There's no doubt about it.
Talk with John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com is what's next for Philly in terms of the camps? When are they going to start getting out on the field? And I guess the 2018 version of this team will start their battles.
Well, they've already started OTAs. They were out on the field today. The media is just not allowed in. The next time we're allowed in, they're going to have a rookie camp next weekend, starting Friday. Doug Pederson will talk. So a week from today, we'll get some clarification on things like Tim Jernigan and hopefully talk to some of the rookies and the younger players. And so the OTAs will continue, and then June 12th, I believe, is the start of the mandatory minicamp when everybody's got to be here. And then you have that small window of a number of weeks off until training camp, and then you're off and running for real.
It all happens here quickly. You know, you go from Super Bowl, parade,
especially
draft.
When you win the Super Bowl.
Right, exactly. It feels like I feel like as soon as the weather starts to turn around and gets nice, you start to think of those preseason games. Even though we all hate them, we count down to them, and we can't wait to kind of get real football back. And we'll start to see the OTAs, as you said, they begin today. No media there, though, so we'll have plenty more. What'd you say, Pederson will be speaking on Friday?
Next Friday, yeah. May 11th, I believe, is the date.
May 11th is this Friday coming up. Okay, yeah, so this Friday coming up. All right, Johnny, we will certainly dive into more football all through the week as the Eagles OTAs are underway, the rookies out in the field, and training camp will be here before we know it.
All right, thanks, guys.